The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. Matt Vickers to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It is an honour to serve under your chairmanship today. This is a debate in support of Petition 626-737, titled Make Swift Bricks Compulsory in New Housing to Help Red-Listed Birds. This is an incredibly important issue, with a huge number of people having signed the petition. The momentum behind the campaign is the result of an incredible effort by campaigner and author Hannah Baum-Taylor, whose energy, determination, expertise and creative approach to campaigning have helped raise awareness of the plight of this iconic and much endangered species. In preparation for this debate today, I've spoken to Hannah and with representatives of the RSPB, Wild Justice and Home Builders Federation. It's a fairly simple ask around how we put measures in place to provide for endangered species in new build housing. But it's an incredibly urgent debate, as these birds are quite frankly running out of time. Swifts, house martins, starlings and house sparrows recently joined the international red list of species experiencing a sharp decline in population, and it's essential we take action to prevent their extinction. In the UK, the swift population has declined by 57%. Swift bricks are one measure which could help turn the corner for all four of these species. The current government approach means that the policy on swift bricks remains under the jurisdiction of local planning authorities, very few of whom have adopted a requirement to put swift bricks into new developments. And where it has been the case, it's because local campaigners have pushed for the measure. There are questions around whether local authorities have the expertise and indeed the capacity to properly consider this as a policy. As the population continues to decline, it's evident we need a new approach and move to a national policy which could drive for much needed change. Swifts are incredible birds, fly in from our own homes' roofs all the way to Africa and back again every year, crossing the Sahara twice. Their top speed ever recorded was 69 miles per hour. They're the ultimate urban boy racer, and depending on how you're feeling, I will.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. On that point about local councils, I've always been fascinated by swifts in North Norfolk. In the east of the country, actually is one of the better breeding grounds thanks to our warmer climate that we have. I'm really concerned only 8 local authorities have put any real effort into implementing swift bricks. Surely one area that we could improve upon this, if there is not national legislation, is that local plans could be adjusted. Why can't local authorities within their local plans make sure that swift bricks are implemented into all new buildings to try and help this problem?
I think you make a very, very good point. I think that it's disappointing to see how few local authorities have adopted this as an approach. I'm currently harassing my local authority. I'm sure lots of our parliamentary colleagues today will be doing exactly the same. And today we're calling to see whether we can drive that from a central approach from central government. They're incredible species. Many of us watch out for them, believing they herald the beginning of British summer. Their status as an established British icon is clear by the support this petition was able to rally, capturing the imaginations and support of 109,894 members of the British public from a wide cross-section of society and across the entire United Kingdom. The number of signatures alone clearly demonstrates the public's concern for losing these iconic birds completely, marking a huge loss to our country's biodiversity and culture. A loss of nesting sites has been cited as one of the biggest factors in the bird population decline, and embarrassingly, the UK has been rated as the worst in the G7 for the amount of wildlife and wild spaces lost to human activity, measured in the Biodiversity Intactness Index. The issue stems from swift nesting sites commonly being found in the eaves and gaps in the brickwork of our houses. They nest inside the drafty spaces, which when we go about remodelling, renovating and insulating, we target with mortar or expanding foam. Since 2013, the government's eco scheme has installed 2.4 million homes, including external wall insulation. Millions of birds have lost their homes due to us improving our home's energy efficiency and its rising status in the government's agenda. And as we demolish 50,000 buildings each year, the figure comes to grow. A loss of nesting sites is particularly hard for swifts and house martins. These birds are site loyal, with them and their life mate returning to the exact same site every year to nest. I will do.
the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's giving a wonderful speech. One of my constituents, Helen Lucy, came to see me and presented me with a very informative booklet about this campaign. So would the honourable gentleman agree with me that there really is no reason why action can't be taken on this? I've written to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities to ask this to be made a national planning requirement. It's win-win. It doesn't cost very much at all for the housing builders, and it would help to save the SWIFT, which, as the honourable gentleman has said, have seen a decline in their population in this country by 57%. So this is a real example of where simple action from the government and those in power can be taken to make a real difference to wildlife in our country.
I think you make a very valid point. I think, you know what, little cost, huge impact. We've got the ask today to government, and whatever we manage to pull off or not pull off today, I'm hopeful that we'll all go back to our constituencies and our own local authorities to drive for a bit more change there as well, should we not be successful in our ask of the government. As swifts return from their perilous 9-month flight to find that their nesting site has been blocked off or destroyed, they'll try to break entry. Swifts are, unsurprisingly, not strong enough to break through several layers of insulation. Many swifts injure themselves during their attempts to get back into their old nesting spots, and unable to fly, they'll likely die. If they've not succeeded but survived, they face a tough task of finding a new spot to nest in time to breed. This leads to many missing the mark, and the population fails to grow again. Alongside old nesting spots being lost, new developments do not provide an alternative. Modern developments have no purpose-built nesting habitat for these birds and are lacking in natural alcoves for birds to shelter. The swift brick answers the first criteria of an intended nesting spot, permanence. Swift bricks are a bespoke option of hosting a universal range of nature. They have been designed to fit the dimensions of a standard UK brick, making them highly suitable for developments, since an overwhelming majority of modern houses are built from bricks or blocks. The bricks sit inside of the wall and do not compromise the strength of the wall nor the insulation. Being fully enclosed with a small outward-facing hole for the swifts to enter through, they aren't offensive to look at and can be adapted to comply with strict aesthetic requirements that many developers may need to meet. Will do.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. As the planning minister at the time, who had a hand in the changes in the NPPF, encouraging the uptake of swift bricks, I'm very pleased to see this debate. Would you agree with me, though, that there is a further advantage to the brick over the box in two ways? I mean, first of all, the brick, although it's primarily aimed at swifts, can offer a home to that other species which is in decline, which basically was the music of my childhood, the house sparrow, which we don't see as much as we used to do in urban areas. But also it allows, in particular in the southeast of England, it protects swifts from effectively being evicted by the parakeet. Now, I speak as somebody who has 6 swift boxes on my house, which have been overtaken by parakeets because they're able to widen the opening because it's wooden rather than brick, and that using bricks would both provide opportunities for other species but protect them from being evicted by more aggressive species, should we say.
I bow to his experience and knowledge, and as the proud owner of 6 swift boxes, bricks, hopefully. I think you make a very good point. I used to listen to the House Martins when I was younger. I've not heard that much of we'd like to hear a lot more from them in the near future, hopefully. And I'd like to thank him for everything he did to get it to this juncture and agree that we need to go that bit further to ensure these bricks reach houses across the UK. Alongside permanence, the swift brick offers weather resistance and climate control. This is the most convincing argument for swift bricks when comparing against an external bird box and the parakeets, perhaps. The first concerns raised by some in response is the fear of any noise or mess. People are concerned about what it means for their sleep, for their patios and their clean washing. But these concerns are misplaced. Swifts are incredibly clean birds, known to go about their business far away from their homes and make minimal noise inside of their nests. Surprising even to me, a recent survey found that 85% of respondents would not be dissuaded from buying a house because of a swift brick, while the remaining 15% believed it would increase the likelihood of them buying such a house. So what's not to like? They're clean, noise-free, the public like them, and they could help protect 4 endangered species.
Thank you for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech. There was a particularly strange claim by the government that there might be instances where the provision of Swift bricks are, in their words, inappropriate. The RSPB has given that pretty short shrift. So would he agree with the RSPB and with me when they say there are no reasons why Swift bricks should not be appropriate in high-density schemes?
I probably would very much agree. And in fact, I'm going to come to that. But I think actually when you look at the costs, we'll come back to the costs, we'll come back to it all, but I think it makes a very valid point. It's a no-brainer in many ways, and there's very little to be lost by putting Swift bricks into homes. So what's not to like? They're clean, noise-free, the public like them, and they could help protect 4 endangered species. I will.
There is another reason to commend Swifts, which is they're not actually here for very long. As the honourable gentleman may know, they broadly arrive in the first week of May, and they leave certainly like clockwork in the first week or so of August. So they're not actually here for a terribly long period, hence why we should give them a nice home to live in.
I very, very much agree. So what's not to like? They're clean, noise-free, the public like them, and they could help protect 4 endangered species. I hear you. What about the cost, and what do the developers say? Swift bricks are incredibly low cost. They're already produced by multiple manufacturers, and home builders have the opportunity to shop around. Prices online start as little as £25. I don't know how much my uncle friend paid for his, but these are pennies to large housing developers. They represent one of the most cost-effective conservation measures and help developers comply with their responsibilities in the Environment Act, creating biodiversity gain. After speaking to developers and representatives from the Home Build Federation, it's clear they take their responsibilities for the environment very seriously. They welcome these proposals and see it as giving clarity and direction as a meaningful way of complying with the Environment Act. In fact, there are many examples of house builders being proactive and putting bricks in place without being compelled to do so. The government-issued response to the petition said it would not be legislating a nationwide approach, as in some high-density schemes, the provision of Swift bricks, for instance, might be inappropriate. Guy Anderson, the RS... Yep.
I just wanted to ask a specific question about that. So if it might not be appropriate, if a brick might not be inhabited by a Swift, actually, what's the harm? Does it matter? Of course it doesn't matter. It just lies there empty, uninhabited. And I fail to see that this is doing any damage at all.
It's a very, very good point. And it's one that Guy Anderson from the RSPB's Migrant Recovery Programme has responded to the government with, saying he cannot see any reason why Swift bricks would be inappropriate in any development in the UK. He says there may be some buildings where the design makes it less likely to ever be used by Swifts. However, even if not used by Swifts, red-listed sparrows, red-listed starlings or red-listed house martins may use them. So I'd urge the government to look again at the policy and what can be done to either enforce or encourage the delivery of more Swift bricks in homes across the country. To end on a brighter note, there are many examples now of Swift bricks. One of the largest installations of Swift bricks has taken place across the Duchy of Cornwall estate. The Big Duchy Bird Box survey showed that across all of the newly installed Swift bricks from 2015... Yep.
I wanted to give credit to the RSPB for this campaign, but also the Stroud Valleys Project, who have been really strong campaigners on this. But they do things like a Swift walk around Minchinhampton Common, which is absolutely fantastic. I wholly endorse the proposals to change with the local authorities and also for planning. But what I want to hear from my honourable friend is a real G-up for everybody who is promoting the protection and of the species, because actually there's a lot going on in many of our communities, and I'm not down on the Swift boxes, by the way. I think that while homeowners don't necessarily have the bricks, they can look to have the boxes, and I think this is just a really wonderful opportunity to celebrate these birds.
I think one of the things about this petition, when you look at lots of petitions, people sign the petition because it's in their own interests. The 109,000 people who signed this petition, it was not necessarily in their own personal interests, but it was something that they see as in our natural interest and a huge game changer for the country. So of the boxes by the big Swift survey from the Duchy of... basically, almost half had been used. Combining this with other large-scale installations that have taken place, Barratt Homes are leading the way, doing their bit, going above and beyond, and they have installed boxes on a huge number of sites and reckon that as much as 96% of the bricks are being used, and this is increasing over time. There's plenty of climate anxiety to go around at the moment. And whilst, unlike Hannah, I'm not going to take my clothes off, nor am I going to go around chucking orange powder and confetti everywhere. I will leave you with this. In a survey carried out by Lancet Planetary Health into climate anxiety in children and young people, around 60% of young people responded to say they feel extremely worried about climate change and our natural environment. This is an opportunity to help save 4 species at minimal cost or inconvenience. It's welcomed by the public, welcomed by developers, and it's time to get on with it before it's too late. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 626737 relating to the use of swift bricks in new housing. And the honourable member can always use a visual display if he wants and hold it up. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you. Surprise. Thank you so much, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair and to speak in this debate and to follow the powerful speech that has just been made. I'd like to start by extending my enormous thanks to Hannah Bourne-Taylor for starting this petition. It's been a real pleasure working with her, and her dedication to saving our precious swifts has been an inspiration. Now, as I'm sure many of you, of people gathered here today will know, last week was Swift Awareness Week, a chance for all of us to celebrate this amazing bird and the steps which are being taken to restore their numbers. But I have to say that I celebrate swifts every day throughout the summer because they are absolutely my favourite bird. They truly are one of nature's miracles. Their migrations span continents, as we've heard. I was reading that a single bird has been known to fly over 1 million miles in its lifetime. And their 12-week stopover in Europe when they pause to breed in our rooftops is the very definition of summer. They spend most of their lives flying, and after leaving the nest, they don't land again, sometimes for an astonishing 3 years. Indeed, they can do everything on the wing, feeding on insects and airborne spiders, skimming mouthfuls of water to drink when flying over smooth rivers or lakes, and bathing by flying slowly through falling rain. They can even sleep in flight. And humans have long been captivated by it. Back in the 18th century, the English cleric and naturalist Gilbert White was inspired to write poetry about the swifts coursing around the church. To mark the swift in rapid giddy ring, dash round the steeple unsubdued of wing, he wrote. And yet, alongside other captivity nesting urban birds like house martins, common starlings and house sparrows, swifts are on the red list of highest conservation concern. As we've heard, their numbers are declining at a terrifying rate, with a staggering 62% fall between 1995 and 2021. But let's be clear, it's not swift populations alone which are collapsing. Swifts symbolise the decline of almost all of those long-distance, insect-eating migrants to the UK. So since 1995, the common cuckoo is down 35%, the nightingale down 48%, the willow warbler down 10%, the house martin down 37%, and the windchat down 57%. And there are many, many others in that depressing list. And the thought that we could lose these beautiful birds from our skies forever is truly devastating, and we do need to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. And yes, many of the steps that we can take are easily taken. As we've heard, swifts are urban birds making their nests in the walls of our homes and living side by side with us. And when they've established a breeding site, they miraculously return there to the same place year after year. It's therefore thought that the loss of suitable nesting sites could be a likely contributor to their decline, with many old buildings being renovated or demolished and new builds not providing suitable nooks and crannies. Swift bricks are a cheap and proven conservation measure with evidence demonstrating that their installation is beneficial, not just to swifts, as we've heard, but to other birds like blue tits and great tits, as well as perhaps those somewhat less glamorous species on the red list like house sparrows and starlings. And yet, despite this, they continue to be left out of developments, with recommendations in the Design Code's guidance and a BSI standard having failed to make the necessary impact. So I wholeheartedly endorse this petition. That I urge the government to mandate the installation of swift bricks in all new developments. Quite happily.
Thank you for your way. She makes a really important point about new developments, as indeed did my honourable friend. Could this not also be a planning requirement for extensions? We all know that in a cost of living crisis, people might not be able to afford to move, but many might need to enlarge their homes. And actually, if a new brick is going in, there is no difficulty in making it a swift one.
I thank her for her intervention and entirely agree with her. I think with just a bit of imagination here, we could really make a difference, and that is a very, very good suggestion. So I urge ministers to act with urgency, to bring forward, for example, an amendment to the Levelling Up Bill to make this law. a step which I know has been endorsed by many members of all parties, indeed including the director of the Conservative Environment Network and former government ministers, indeed. So there is a strong, it's not often that one stands here pointing to such cross-party support for any kind of proposal that we're making. And this is one, I think, that does have that cross-party support and could be so easily put in place. I wanted to say a few words about Brighton, because as honourable members would expect, Brighton is leading the way in this, as in so many others. Since June 2020, any building over 5 metres is mandated to include Swift bricks, with the county ecologist recommending specific requirements for major developments. And that follows the redevelopment of the former site of Brighton General Hospital, which was home to the second largest colony of swifts in the south of England, and where they've been using old and decaying ventilator bricks and other gaps in the walls as nesting holes. Now, of course, any repairs made to the holes would have rendered them unsuitable for the swifts, so swift boxes were retrofitted into the building, matching the existing brickwork, as well as conforming to British brick standards, meaning the boxes and the bricks could seamlessly fit into the design of the building. And the project is now being seen as a flagship example of swift provision. So I'd like to pay tribute to conservationists in Brighton and Hove, including Heather Ball, who have worked so hard to make our city more swift-friendly. And I know that local swift groups now have been inspecting new developments to find if they are adhering to the rules. Moving on, I just wanted to take a moment to challenge some of the arguments made by government in their response to this petition so far, and I'm hoping very much that they will change the kind of responses that they've been given so far, because whilst they say that they welcome action by developers to provide swift bricks, they say, and I quote, that they consider this a matter for local authorities, depending upon the specific circumstances of each site, and that they therefore will not be legislating to mandate specific types of infrastructure. I would just like to say that I think that is just such a massively wasted opportunity. It would take such a small thing in order to be able to mandate this nationally, instead of which we know that there are not enough local authorities who have done this. And even if we were to wait for each of them to come to their local plan and start to mandate it, it would take a long time. This is something that would have huge support, which could be driven from the centre and which appropriately could do that. Instead, the government has pointed to planning conditions that can be imposed by local authorities and the introduction of new local nature recovery strategies. And as I say, while some local authorities do mention swift bricks in their guidance for local plans, only a handful have actually made it a condition for new housing. And whilst local recovery strategies may identify swift bricks as important, there is not currently a legal link into the planning system. So a legal duty to include swift bricks in all new developments is essential to deliver the new level of action which is required to save our swifts. And as the Right Honourable Member mentioned, there are ways we could extend that to extensions and other moments when people are doing work on their homes as well. The Right Honourable Member who introduced this debate has already quoted from the RSPB quite clearly demolishing the idea that there are times when swift bricks can be inappropriate. So I hope the government won't keep saying that. Instead of which, let's see a change on this as soon as possible. And I just want to end, Sir Edward, by saying that time is not on our side. And as I've said time and again in this House, the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, with a staggering 15% of species now at risk of extinction. So yes, swift bricks and swift boxes are important, but they are also far from being enough. Because nature is under assault from every angle, from our intensive agricultural system, which douses our fields in poison, to ancient woodlands being destroyed to make way for roads and railways, and water companies incessantly pumping sewage into our waterways. If we're to have any chance of changing this terrifying picture, then we must start by quite literally making a home for nature, by living once again with a species which has long been our closest neighbour. If the swift goes, it will be its own tragedy, but it will also be symbolic of so much else. And I want to end by quoting the naturalist and campaigner Mark Cocker, who's just written a wonderful book all about swifts, which I warmly commend, called One Midsummer's Day. And in it he writes this: "The declines are profoundly troubling, but they are important in an additional sense. They are part of the bird's deeper capacity to serve as symbols for all life. For this, in truth, is a deeply troubled planet. Until now, we have seemed unwilling to educate ourselves or to feel in our deepest core that life is a single unitary whole, that all parts are fused inextricably within a self-sustaining, mutually giving, mutually dependent life fabric." So if we were to truly live as if that were true, we would know that taking care of nature is a way of taking care of ourselves and all the other species with which we are so privileged to share this one precious planet. Mandating swift bricks in new buildings is the smallest, simplest steps we could take, but it would also stand symbolically, I think, for so much more. It would be that first step, but a symbol of our recognition of that deeper interconnectedness. It's a step which I very much hope that the government will take, and for all those members from the government party who have been speaking so strongly about the importance of swift bricks, I hope they will carry that passion as well into many of the other debates we will have around things like industrialised agriculture, which is also such a force for ill when it comes to the precious nature which it is sadly destroying.
Robert Courts.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And it's an enormous pleasure to speak in this debate and to follow the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion, who's spoken so passionately and so powerfully. And it's a passion I entirely share. It's one of the great things about Westminster Hall is that you are able to debate things that often wouldn't find the time on the main chamber, but also you're able to bring forward your own passion for a topic. And this is one that I've had for many, many years, as I'll explain in a moment. But could I just start off, Sir, by paying tribute to my constituent, Hannah Taylor, for her incredible passion and for getting this petition going. And she came to see me a couple of months ago now to ask me whether I'd be prepared to support. And it gave me an enormous pleasure to be able to say to her in constituency surgery that I was only too delighted to support this, because this is something I care enormously about. But I really pay tribute to her for having brought this to the national stage. It's an enormous achievement. And as we've heard, swifts are extraordinary birds. And I'm going to spend a few moments talking about why they're extraordinary, because it then impacts upon why we need to take action. They are breathtakingly charismatic. They are the fastest birds in the world in level flight. Once they start and take wing, essentially never land again except for the purposes of breeding. So a swift, when it takes flight for the first time, will probably not land again for 2 to 3 years. They learn to do absolutely everything on the wing. They are incredibly fast. They can eat up to 10,000 insects a day. They can drink on the wing. They can even extraordinarily sleep on the wing. One of the great pleasures of living in a rural area like my part of the world in West Oxfordshire is you can go out of an evening and you can watch swifts as they dash around the rooftops at rooftop level, which is usually young swifts looking for somewhere to nest. But then as the hours tick by, you see them circle higher and higher and higher into the sky. And the reason that they're doing that is to gain altitude, so that they then essentially, as I understand it, shut down part of their brain to sleep, whilst the rest of their brain keeps them airborne. Utterly extraordinary. They are so perfectly adapted for flight that they have difficulty landing. It's part of the reason why they don't, because their legs have grown to such shrunk to such a small size that if they ever do land on a flat surface, they're not able to take off again. So everything they do is on the wing. Now, this is important, not just because they're incredible birds, although they are, and I want to take action because they're incredible, but because it shows why we have to do something here. Because unlike other species which can adapt into normal nest boxes, swifts can't. And swifts are one of those birds, a little bit in their way, a bit like cats and dogs, that have learned that over the years that humans provide a good species to live alongside. Swifts started off their ecological evolutionary life by living in cliffs and trees, but realised that the houses that humans lived in leave little gaps just under the roofs, which are protected from the weather and are very much like, in fact, a cliff. And so they slot into them, where they then have their eggs, raise their chicks, and then leave. And this is absolutely critical because it means that we've provided that space for them. But of course, as buildings are being renovated, that space is being taken away simply because we are renovating buildings. So having learned to live alongside us, for us being good partners to them, they're now in the position where they're losing out on that habitat. And that, of course, is something that I think we ought to do something about. But as we've heard from the brilliant speech from my honourable friend from Stockton, that these are birds. Some people may feel, well, do I want them living in the roof? Yes, you do. You won't know they're there, almost certainly. They don't leave mess outside. They don't make any noise when they're on the nest. You simply won't know they're there, apart from the little dart as they fly down. This, too, is important, because they would generally nest at a height not unlike the rafters that we see here in Westminster Hall, because of the danger of them grounding. So they have to have a drop. They have to be able to push themselves out, drop, get enough airspeed in order to be able to keep on flying. So beautifully and perfectly adapted are they. But it means that you have to take action a specific way for them. Normal nest boxes won't work. You need to think about a way that you can integrate them into the homes and the houses that we have. The great thing is that swift boxes, as we can see, swift boxes are easy, swift bricks are even better, as we can see them here. A swift brick builds into the building. It therefore protects the birds inside from heat, from wind. It is utterly unobtrusive. Unless you know it's there and you're looking for it on a building, you won't even know it's there as a human. But they are cheap, they're easy to put in, they're totally unobtrusive, and I know this is the case because I've done it twice myself. Very much like my friend for North West Hands, I've also put Swift boxes up and Swift bricks. And there's a number of which ways you can do it. The first time that I did this, when I got interested in this many years ago, I partnered with Charwell Swift, who are one of the action groups in my part of the world, and we put Swift bricks into the church tower of Bladen Church, which is the village I live in. And of course, no one will know that they're there. The Swifts, of course, know they're there. They see them, they're high up, and once they start using them, it's simply something that's an unobtrusive part of the church fabric. There isn't an impact on the inside of the church, and it simply provides that nesting space. And then I went on further to put a nest box outside and then some Swift bricks when I built an extension, as has been quite rightly said by my honourable friend for Romsey. She's absolutely right. New builds you can do this for, existing homes you can do this for, and you can do it when you build an extension as well. They are quick, they are cheap, they are easy. There is nothing not to like about this. The problem is that to do this as an individual, you have to have a certain level of enthusiasm and a certain level of knowledge, which I know a lot of people here have. But it's too much to expect everybody to have this all over the country. And much the same thing applies when you're looking at local authorities as well. Local authorities have many important functions that they have to carry out, but it's expecting a lot of them to understand the precise nature of where you should put a Swift brick and how. The good news is that we can help with this through guidance, through legislation, through working on the biodiversity net gain framework. We can do this here. Now, I'm not the sort of person that always rushes and says government must do something, must legislate. Sometimes I think it's best that government doesn't do that. But there are things that government can do which are quick, which are easy, which are cheap, which have no ill effects at all by providing guidance, a small bit of legislation, and it makes an enormous difference. So the things that we can do are the legislation that's been spoken about already. If we want to see a more biodiverse world, we are going to have to take steps, and this is one of the steps that can very easily be taken. And in any event, what we can do is to work on the biodiversity net gain matrix to ensure that buildings are taken as a habitat. Because here's the problem with Swifts. They only use the sky, and they only use buildings, neither of which count under the biodiversity net gain matrix. So it clearly won't help them. You can change that by understanding that for a Swift, a building is its habitat. And that's something that we can do right here, right now. I thank the House very much for listening to me and for listening to my enthusiasm on this subject. I know it's one that's shared by so many. I really do feel that this is something that we can do. It will make an enormous difference to the natural world. It will make an enormous difference to Swifts. But it's also good for us too. And let's see it happen.
Mr. Bergen, do you want to speak? No, I saw I had you down as speaking. Then I'll have Helen Morgan.
Sir Edward, it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair and a pleasure to follow such a passionate speech from the member for Witney. So I'm also a rural MP, and the benefit and protection of Swifts is an issue which is incredibly important to my constituents. Indeed, one of my constituents, Sarah Gibson, is the author of a fantastic book about Swifts called Swifts and Us, and while I haven't read it, I have obtained a copy and I'm very much looking forward to reading it. A total of 305 people from North Shropshire signed this petition, and I've received frequent casework about the topic of Swift conservation and the importance of ensuring Swift bricks are included in planning regulations. And it's understandable why so many people feel passionately about this, because as we've heard this afternoon, Swifts are incredible birds. They do everything on the wing, so they do everything while they're still in the air, sleeping, mating, bathing, all while in flight. They also eat in flight, which I shall come on to shortly, efficiently chasing down insects while in the air. In case this isn't impressive enough, as we've already heard, they are the fastest bird in level flight and have been recorded flying at almost 70 miles an hour. And on top of this, of course, they are beautiful. The sight and sound of them coming in and out of the eaves of buildings are, for many people, the first signs of summer. And I'm sure colleagues here will agree with me that the best canvas sessions are the ones with the Swift screaming over the top of your head. But unfortunately, the population's declining. The number of Swifts in the UK has decreased by nearly 60% since 1995. And it's yet another reminder of the rapid rate of decline of a beautiful, important species, and many other birds, such as the house martin. Like those, Swifts have joined that red list for the first time in 2021. So something must be done. Now, I confess, before I was an MP, I hadn't heard of a Swift brick, but since I've become aware of this campaign, they seem to me to be a fantastic solution. They offer artificial home for swifts, which the British Trust of Ornithology have stated works incredibly well for the reintroduction of swift nesting sites in areas where they've been lost. Swift bricks have been incorporated into new planning developments in both urban and rural areas over the last few years. Alongside being cheap to produce, one of the main benefits of the bricks is that they can be implemented easily into many kinds of developments. For example, they've been installed into the rooftops above Oxford Circus and the walls of Lambeth Hospital, and as we've heard, in Brighton as well. In addition to this, one of my constituents has created a Facebook group dedicated to the protection of swifts and designed to spread information about the ease of installing artificial nesting spaces in properties. And these boxes, I understand, have ensured over 100 new artificial swift nesting places have been installed to properties around North Shropshire over the last 12 months. So artificial nesting places such as Swift bricks, therefore, seemed like a fantastic solution to a serious problem. And I'm even ensured by the Swift Conservation Trust that parents eat the chicks' droppings, meaning there are no piles of dropping under the nests. This is surely yet another benefit for homeowners who might be concerned about having artificial nesting places for swifts in their property. The benefits of protecting them are not only related to protecting the most impressive animals, but also providing swifts for other types of endangered species, such as other red-listed birds, the house sparrows, starlings and wrens that we've already heard about today. So in assisting the longevity of the swift, therefore, swift bricks would also be creating a home for other endangered species and improved biodiversity. Despite this, though, there's another hurdle to swifts' attempt for survival, which lies outside habitat creation, and this is related to their diet. A swift's diet consists mainly of insects, specifically flying insects, of which they can eat as many as 100,000 in one day. They include aphids, flying ants and mosquitoes. The Wildlife Trust is very concerned regarding ensuring that there are enough insects to feed an increase in swifts. The decline in insect species is a sure sign of nature under threat in the UK. The pollution of prime feeding habitats for swifts, such as wetlands and grasslands, therefore present another real potential for barrier for swifts to flourish in the UK. So the matter is twofold. We must provide sufficient space for swifts to live, but we must also consider their need to feed and tackle the depletion of insect varieties head-on. So overall, I support the members' calls today to back the mandatory use of swift bricks in all new homes and extensions, and this could be done so easily and so quickly. As we've heard, we could add it to the Levelling Up Bill. We have opportunities in the National Planning Policy Framework and the Future Home Standard, all of which we are waiting to see and could incorporate this important measure. But we must also stress that to support biodiversity for all bird populations, we must look at insect decline and a sufficient food supply for these impressive birds. So therefore, I urge the Minister, let's look at planning regulations, let's look at the Levelling Up Bill, let's look at the National Planning Policy Framework and the Future Home Standards, and take this really simple step to make a first move in the support of these amazing birds and to support biodiversity in the UK.
Thank you, Sir. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. As always, I congratulate Hannah on bringing this petition forward and to the Honourable Member for Stockton South for introducing this debate. It was a real privilege to be asked by the RSPB quite a long time ago now to be the species champion for the swift. And I have to say, you know, I feel like perhaps, you know, I'm clearly not the only one, am I, in the whole room today is full of champions for the swift. I think I rather lucked out in being chosen ahead of them. We've heard so much about what an amazing bird it is. I'm not going to sort of go over that ground again, but it is an amazing bird. Soon after taking up the role of species champion, I went to visit Bristol Swifts, and it just shows you as a couple that had, it shows the level of dedication of some of these local groups. They'd spent 7 years trying to attract swifts to their homes, having put in the bricks. They were playing mating calls, and they'd finally managed to get the swifts to come. As at last year, their swift boxes provided nests for 16 breeding pairs and 36 chicks last year, and that's just in the one home. And there are so many other amazing groups I've sort of seen on Twitter, particularly over the last year or so, just how many in different localities there are. There's places like Rotherham, Hastings, Lewis, Sheffield. I think we... Oh, yeah.
Remiss me not to take the opportunity to congratulate the work of Hampshire Swifts. I opened a conference for them back in 2018, but it's really noticeable that they have contributed to the planning process, feeding into the local plan review, and it's groups like that that are doing so much to push this issue. It just requires the Minister to push it over the line.
It certainly does. I was about to say Hertford, Halesworth, and now I can say Hampshire as well. Cambridge is another group. I do want to pay particular tribute to Save Wolverton Swifts, which has a special place in my heart, and that's because it's run by my sister, who is in the audience here today. It shows perhaps the difference between us, that I'm always here talking about things. She's actually out there doing things, and she, in terms of their group, they provided 170 new homes for Swifts since 2020. I think this year she's finally got Swifts taking up homes in her own home. Last year, there was a real problem because of the heat wave, with fledglings trying to leave the boxes, the bricks, too early because it was just too hot in there and they weren't ready to fly. And I know all around the country, local groups were rescuing Swifts. And in this case, I think my sister rescued or cared for 17. I remember particularly we went down to Sidcup to pick up her daughter from university, and we're sitting there in a Sri Lankan restaurant outdoors, and there's the three of us, and then there's a Swift on the other chair being fed crickets, because it had to be fed every hour to keep it alive, and she was doing that while juggling, 3 kids and going to a full-time job as well. They are making these little Swift, it's an interesting fact, a Swift weighs the same as a Cadbury's cream egg, and they're making these egg cozies to raise funds for the Swift groups if anyone wants one. I'm sure I can arrange that. I also want to thank the last group, Milton Keynes Swifts, which works very closely with Save Wolverton Swifts. I want to thank Mike Leroy for sending me a comprehensive briefing about their work that they are doing with developers and housing associations. It was particularly helpful on biodiversity net gain, which I'll come on to in a moment. As we've heard, when a building is demolished or renovated, Swifts lose their nests, and new buildings do not always offer the same nooks and crannies. Again, as we've heard, this habitat loss is one of the reasons Swifts are now red-listed as conservation concern, with their numbers falling by 62% between 1995 and 2021. Again, I think other members have explained very effectively how Swift bricks are very simple and easy to use, that they blend into the building, they don't affect insulation, which was something that was raised with me, particularly with all the discussion at the moment about the need to retrofit homes. And the whole energy efficiency programme, it wouldn't have an impact on that. They're durable, low cost, they don't require maintenance. And they're also, even if Swifts aren't attracted, they could be beneficial for other red-listed species like house sparrows, starlings and house martins. Hibernating tortoiseshell butterflies and bees have also used them. Yeah.
Absolute fantastic knowledge on Swifts, and the former aviation minister, the Right Honourable Member for Whitney's amazing account for aviation of the Swifts as well. But listen, Swift bricks, been around for many, many years now. I understand way over 10 years, possibly 20 years. Very simple, cheap to install. There is deep affection for these birds, not least in Stroud, and thanks to the 500 petitioners today and thousands more. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we've had long enough now to show that we need to mandate? It's so simple, it's so obvious that we need to do this, but it's not happening at a great enough scale. So it's mandation that is going to make the difference for this species.
Well, I think, as has already been said, we've only seen a small number of local authorities, I think Exeter, Hackney, Islington, Brighton and Hove, that have actually gone down the step of requiring this. I'm certainly working on Bristol, and I hope with the next iteration of its local plan, that's something that we will do. But that is tiny compared to the potential of what we could do, and it would be such an easy move if we could have Swift bricks in all new developments, not just new housing, and the petition is about housing, but about other buildings too. I think it would certainly, we need to do something to turn this from a nice little local initiative to something that is far more widespread. And I think it is important to say that developers aren't opposed to this. Barrett's have actively worked with the RSPB to develop a Swift brick and has pledged to install Swift bricks in all new houses built in Bristol, as well as several other cities. I did actually go up on the roof of one of their new houses in Blackberry Hill to install, one of those classic MP with your hard hat type pictures, to go up and do that. Another sister is actually working with housing developers in Milton Keynes, and again, went there. They're putting Swift bricks in all their new houses. So it's, it can be done, and there isn't opposition to it. So there's not really any reason why the government should be cautious about this, I think. Yep.
I just wanted to be clear about broadly, well, hopefully a collective agreement about what we're asking for. While we're asking the government to mandate on Swift bricks, the plural is important. These, as anybody will know, these are gregarious birds who like to nest in colonies, and putting the odd brick here and there is unlikely to be fruitful. What we actually need is groups of 4 to 6, possibly more. As she said, in Bristol, they've got seriously more than that. But they're just putting a brick, singular, is not much use to anybody, least of all the Swifts.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case, and that's why we want to see it at scale. As I think has already been said, the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management has highlighted surveys that said that buyers wouldn't actually be put off. Again, this is something that's been asked, wouldn't this be a nuisance? I actually live by the harbour in Bristol, and every time I open my balcony doors, pigeons and seagulls come in, and I've got a particularly resolute pair that are determined to build a nest. So every time I can't turn my back without them coming in, and that. It is not the same as having pigeons and seagulls in your house. And it is, they're excellent lodgers, and most people wouldn't even have any idea that they were there. It is reasonable to ask, I think, why swifts, as opposed to any other creature that is under threat, merit a specific planning requirement. Firstly, it's a known problem with an identifiable cause and a practical, straightforward and cost-effective solution. I'm sure DEFRA would be delighted if we could do the same for all the environmental challenges and all red-listed species. Secondly, other species are already protected by planning policy in a way that swifts aren't. The conservation, natural habitats, etc., it says here, regulations, require developers' ecology report to cover protected species, such as bats, which are officially designated under the habitats regulations. And mitigating steps are required if these species are present on site. The problem is that the Birds of Conservation Concern Red List, which was developed with funding from Natural England, is not covered by any similar legal requirements. Nor are swifts included in the list of habitats and species of principal importance in England, so there is no obligation on local authorities to consider swifts as part of their biodiversity duty. The government's response to the petition emphasised local planning decisions and the specific circumstances of each site. So can the Minister tell us in what circumstances exemptions might be required? The benefit of including these bricks seems to outweigh the costs, and as has been said, even if the bricks are not ultimately used by swifts, they may benefit other species. There is already a British standard on integral nest boxes to guide developers on selection and installation. There's a variety of brick designs to suit different types of construction. There's an RSPB fact sheet that lists at least 20. The RSPB has said there are no reasons why swift bricks should not be appropriate for high-density schemes. And contrary to the government's response, the RSPB advised that connectivity to wildlife is largely irrelevant for swifts. As I think was said, they are birds that either are in the air or in their little swift bricks rather than out and about in nature. So finally, Sir Edward, I want to turn to the question of biodiversity net gain, which the Honourable Member for Whitney mentioned briefly. If, as the government suggests, swift bricks are not appropriate for all developments, amending the biodiversity net gain rules would allow developers to consider if swift bricks are an efficient way for them to meet their biodiversity targets. I wrote to the then Minister for Housing 3 years ago, calling for the building regulations to be revised to make swift bricks compulsory in all new homes. I received a disappointing reply then, and the government's response to this petition suggests its position has not changed. But the regulatory framework has changed with the introduction of the biodiversity net gain requirement. The government's own planning practice guidance emphasises the value of swift bricks to biodiversity net gain, but this is undermined by the habitat-based biodiversity net gain metric under which the loss of a swift nest and the addition of swift bricks are irrelevant, so they just don't count in the way that, say, hedgerows or trees or other sites for nests would. So can the Minister tell us what incentive developers will have to install swift bricks when they will not count towards their 10% biodiversity net gain? The biodiversity net gain approach is not perfect because the loss of a swift habitat will not necessarily be captured in the baseline assessment. And I suspect that might be something the Minister would say in response. If a survey isn't conducted at the right time during nesting season, and as we've heard, it's only a 12-week nesting season, the nest would be likely to be missed. But including swifts in the metric as a starting point would mean there's an incentive to look for nests and check the RSPB Swift survey or the Swift Mapper app. And I'm sure these local groups would be delighted to assist the department in telling people exactly where swifts are likely to turn up. Even if no nest is detected, it means developers have one easy way to secure some biodiversity net gain credits. Milton Keynes Swifts this weekend were checking the nest boxes for a developer who had agreed to incorporate nest sites. They told me the development did not install swift bricks because the architect was not aware of these at a sufficiently early stage in the process. If swift bricks were included in the biodiversity net gain metric, it seems they would be more likely to be considered during the design process. The biodiversity net gain metric already includes design features like green roofs, so it's not a big task to ask them to include swift bricks as an option. In fact, it's a lot easier to put swift bricks in than it is to make sure that a green roof is installed and thrives for years to come. Relying on biodiversity net gain has the added benefit of considering all developments, not just housing, with larger public buildings and commercial premises potentially able to accommodate more bricks. Swift bricks also give more options for biodiversity net gain in urban environments, something that was sadly neglected in the government's Environmental Improvement Plan 2023. We do have to ensure that we green our urban environments. We can't have a situation where everyone's gardens are concreted over and, you know, green spaces are built on and it's offset somewhere way outside the cities. We need to make sure that we do urban improvements, and this is an ideal thing to do. So by way of conclusion, does the Minister agree that the biodiversity net gain metric has adversely changed the regulatory landscape for swifts? I hope she will tell us that she thinks a revised BNG metric could be a useful tool. I know that that's a matter for DEFRA rather than this department. DEFRA has already committed to reviewing species inclusion in future major updates to the biodiversity net metric, and I would urge the Minister to discuss this with DEFRA colleagues. And just on a final note, as the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion said, we are talking about this in the context of a massive biodiversity loss and an ecological emergency. This is one step towards addressing it. It's an easy step towards addressing it. So I hope the Minister looks favourably on what we're saying today.
Sir Edwards, it's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate the petitioners on securing today's debate. Swifts, as we've heard, are truly remarkable birds. To me, their screeching calls are the sound of summer arriving. I love the sound so much, I use their call as the ringtone on my phone, although this has been known to confuse keen birders. Swifts are known to spend 10 months of the year entirely airborne, and they only land to breed, as we've heard, returning to the same nest site for a few short months to raise their young. When swifts arrive back in the UK in spring after a marathon journey from their wintering grounds in Africa, they need two things. As the member for North Shropshire pointed out, a safe place to nest and plenty of invertebrates to eat, but these things are becoming increasingly difficult to find. As our houses are renovated and old buildings demolished, swifts find themselves shut out of the nooks and crannies they make their homes in. Habitat loss, pesticide use and other factors are also making it harder for swifts to find enough food to breed successfully. And in 2021, the species was added to the red list of endangered birds after its population fell. In Chester, we've seen a 46% decline. Swift bricks and boxes are a simple solution to the decline on nest spaces for these birds. Indeed, I've had a swift box on the side of my own house installed by the local members of the Chester branch of the RSPB. We've talked about domestic buildings, but actually we should be incorporating bricks into public buildings too. I was pleased that when I was the leader of Cheshire West and Chester Council in Chester, I worked alongside the Chester RSPB on their Chester Swift Conservation Project to raise awareness of the alarming fall in breeding swift numbers in the UK and to coordinate actions to increase the availability of suitable nest sites around Chester. Chester Northgate is the most significant development in the city for decades and was led by the council. Because of the importance of sustaining the local bird population, 20 swift hotels were installed in the Northgate car park brickwork as part of the Northgate project. I'm proud to have promoted this as part of a progressive decision by a local council. Councils can go so far, but more support is needed. The Bluecoat building on Northgate Street in Chester, where my constituency office is based, also installed swift boxes as part of the conservation project in Chester. The trust funding enabled RSPB Chester to increase the availability of suitable nest sites around the city by offering subsidised box installations in areas near existing swift colonies. Through RSPB Chester Group's Swift Box scheme, more than 80 boxes have been installed in houses and buildings in and around Chester so far. These boxes are free of charge, and the RSPB will even put them up for you. I'd encourage any residents in Chester to consider putting a Swift box up in their house. I do believe that the decline in nest spaces has a simple solution, and I'm pleased that in Chester, among others, we're leading the way. Swifts have been with us for millions of years, and I hope we can make sure this remarkable species stay with us for much longer. Thank you.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Sir Edward, and it's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. I think many of us this afternoon have talked about constituents who've urged us to be here and to attend this debate. And in my case, it's a group called Devon Swifts who have recommended my attendance. They've got over 1,000 followers on Facebook, and they are pledging to turn up at shows and events in Devon shortly under a gazebo to encourage other people who live in Devon to take greater interest in swifts. 2 years ago, in 2021, the swifts were added to the red list as part of the UK's conservation status report. And the RSPB has reported that the number of swifts has halved in 20 years, with fewer than 90,000 arriving last year. And the same is true also of similar species that can use similar sites to nest. The house martin has declined by 50% since 1960. And it should be said that species on this list that are retreating or falling in number are being threatened on a global level. It's not just in the UK that numbers are falling. This is very much an international issue, and made worse, actually, by climate change. We see the sort of environmental degradation around the world that is affecting the birds' populations. The member for Brighton Pavilion hoped that some of us in this room, might also take a greater interest and turn up to debates talking about wider environmental issues around degradation and nature. And I would agree with her. And I think also we should think about, while we're thinking about compulsion and how the government might make some things absolutely mandatory of developers, we should be thinking also about insulation of homes, because 2.3 million homes were insulated in 2012, whereas we're seeing fewer than 100,000 homes insulated per year now. Swifts prefer to build their own permanent homes by squeezing through tiny gaps inside roofs. And as we see older buildings changed, modified, or taken down, some of these nest sites are not available to swifts. Whereas swift bricks can be embedded in walls in the upper section, just below the roof, and offer a safe space for swifts to establish themselves. Now, the Honourable Member for Stockton South, who I pay tribute to for securing this debate, referred to concerns around noise and mess before he understandably put aside these concerns or perhaps allayed these worries that people might have. And I would add to that, he's right, that people can choose, in a sense, developers can choose where to put these swift bricks in a way that we can't perhaps be so selective if we don't have swift bricks. So when we think about other species of bird using these bricks, perhaps say, for example, the starling, there have been concerns that I've heard expressed before about mess and noise. But if you put the swift brick in a place where that's going to be away from people, in a home where it's not the case that the mess will sort of bother people underneath, that's great that we can then choose to put these bricks in a particular location. These bricks help dozens of other species, not just starlings and swifts, but blue tits, wrens, house sparrows, house martins, and many others that are on the red list for endangered British birds. I was looking earlier at the RSPB's Swift Mapper, and in my part of Devon, we have 114 pairs reported south of Honiton and 133 pairs west of Columpton. Now, it seems that the government is opposed to making these new bricks a mandatory part of future planning developments, arguing that local authorities can choose to make this a condition on their own account. And typically, I would welcome that sort of devolution. I think there are many areas that Westminster legislates on that are better perhaps put within the purview of local governments. But in this instance, I am not quite so sure. I think actually rather, given that we've had such little take-up, with only 8 local authorities choosing to use these swift bricks, there needs to be a degree of compulsion. And I pay tribute to Exeter City Council for being among those 8 local authorities that have encouraged the use of swift bricks. But clearly, if we're to avoid losing further swift population in the future, further swifts in the future, we're going to need to require developers to use swift bricks. I will.
I'm sure you recognise that the government actually mandates an awful lot about housing, not least to do with human occupation. Whether we should have a front door step or not, the dimensions of windows, the particular disposition of in London, even the height of the ceiling. It would therefore seem a bit odd that the government wouldn't mandate on something as simple as this.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Member for that point, and I agree with him. It's an area where a very small action by the government could deliver a real benefit for our natural environment. So I urge the Minister to listen to the strength of feeling, not just in this room from Honourable and Right Honourable Members, but also from activists and from campaigners, both here and in our constituencies. It's a small action. It could make a big difference, and I'd be very grateful to see this change. Thank you.
Matthew Pennicook.
Thank you, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair as ever and to respond to this important debate on behalf of the opposition. Let me start by thanking Hannah Bourne-Taylor for creating the petition and the members of the public who signed it in such large numbers. It is unsurprising, but nevertheless still heartening to see so many people mobilise against the decline of nature across these isles, and in particular in defence of the swift. I also want to recognise, as several honourable members have in the course of the debate, the contribution made over many years by local swift conservation groups across the country. The various initiatives they have collectively developed and implemented have made a difference, and they deserve to be commended for their work. I also thank the member for Stockton South for opening the debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee and all those other honourable members who have participated this afternoon. It has been a debate, I think, defined by a series of passionate, thoughtful and informative contributions. Sir Edward, this debate has fallen to me to respond to as a member of the Shadow Levelling Up Housing and Communities team, because it ostensibly relates to a technical planning matter. But as the debate has made abundantly clear, the specific issue we are considering touches upon a far broader range of concerns. As several honourable members have alluded to through their contributions, when we weigh in our minds the case for specific measures, such as swift bricks, context is everything. It's for that reason that we on this side of the chamber start from a recognition that the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, with analysis from the Natural History Museum suggesting that with an average of only 53% of our biodiversity left, the UK is in the bottom 10% of the world's countries and last in the G7 when it comes to the state of ecosystem biodiversity. It is unarguable, Sir Edward, that more must be done to protect and enhance our natural environment. Labour also appreciates fully how sharply breeding swift numbers across the country have declined over recent decades, to the extent, as a number of honourable members have mentioned in the debate, that they are now on the red list of birds of conservation concern in the UK. Now, the precise reasons for the rapid decline of the species are complex, and several honourable members, including the Honourable Lady, the member for North Shropshire, alluded to some of those reasons. But the loss of available nesting sites, largely through home renovation, insulation, demolition, without sufficient alternatives being created, is undoubtedly a significant contributory factor. It is essential, in our view, that as part of efforts to increase biodiversity net gain, we drive up rates of swift brick installation in new build properties, in houses, but also, quite rightly, in other public buildings too, across the whole of England. The question, Sir Edward, is therefore not whether the government needs to do more to halt and reverse the decline of the swift population in the UK, or whether swift bricks would make a significant difference to swift numbers, along with other red-listed species. It is rather whether it is necessary, and this tension has featured throughout the debate, whether it is necessary, in order to boost swift numbers in the UK, to mandate the incorporation of swift bricks into all new build properties, as opposed to taking steps to better encourage and incentivise their rollout. Now, Sir Edward, our instinct when it comes to achieving biodiversity net gain, including the specific 10% BNG target in all new developments that will apply from November this year, is to allow for maximum local discretion, because it is local communities and their representatives who are best placed to determine what specific measures are appropriate on any given development site. As such, we certainly have a degree of sympathy with the government's position that local authorities and developers should not be compelled to include swift bricks in every single housing unit they respectively authorise or construct. However, and there definitely is a however, we are deeply concerned about current swift brick installation rates. To the best of my knowledge, no agreed estimate of the total number of swift bricks needed to restore swift numbers lost over recent decades exists. I know that some people have made estimates, but there is little doubt that the numbers currently being incorporated into new buildings each year are lower than what they need to be if we're to address the decline of swift numbers in the UK. Now, that is not to overlook the tangible progress that has been and is being made in various parts of the country. We appreciate that many local planning authorities and communities have already included specific provisions relating to swift bricks in their local development and neighbourhood plans and associated supplementary guidance. And we recognise that many new residential developments across England are incorporating large numbers of swift bricks. But it is undeniably the case that these incentives remain the exception rather than the norm, not least because, as the honourable gentleman, the member for Witney, and my honourable friend, the member for Bristol East, mentioned in their remarks, that swift bricks and other species-based features are not explicitly included within the metric for calculating biodiversity net gain, with the result, Sir Edward, that swift brick coverage across the country, estimated that fewer than 20,000, remains far too limited at present. Labour therefore takes the view that current national planning policy and guidance in respect of this matter, which essentially amounts, Sir Edward, to listing swift bricks as one of many small features that can measurably increase biodiversity and recommending them as part of best practice local design guides and codes, is insufficiently prescriptive. While we do not believe that local discretion should be overridden lightly, we intend to reflect very carefully on the arguments made in the debate in favour of making swift bricks mandatory in every new home that is built in England, and we certainly do not rule out such a measure in the future. However, as things stand today, we are absolutely convinced that there is a robust case for government to consider revising existing national planning policy and guidance in this area, so at least to create a presumption in favour of incorporating swift brick provisions within local development and neighbourhood plans and associated guidance. Under such an arrangement, Sir Edward, and with swift bricks properly scored on the BNG metric system, the onus would at least be on local authorities and developers to justify, in each instance, on a site-specific basis, not installing swift bricks across them. Rather, I will give way.
I'm grateful to him giving way, but he does seem to be making life so much more difficult for himself and for all of us. I really honestly couldn't believe my ears when I heard him basically saying that he would not yet, at least, support the position of saying that swift bricks should be mandatory, because it would save so much time rather than all of these extra hoops that he's putting in place. We know that this is urgent. We know that there can do no harm to have a swift brick, even if a swift doesn't use it. We know that starlings might, or we know that sparrows might. So I really don't understand where his reluctance is coming from on this point.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, and I certainly understand the point she's making. My reluctance stems from the fact, but and let me be clear, I hope I was clear enough, Sir Edward, we certainly don't rule out mandation as a step in the future. My reluctance stems from the fact that our instinct, as I said, when it comes to achieving biodiversity net gain, is to allow for local discretion, and we don't think that should be overridden lightly. And secondly, Sir Edward, and I've heard some very compelling arguments in this debate on this particular point, I want to be absolutely convinced on a practical level that there are no sites and buildings which will not be suitable for swift bricks, you know, in the way that a mandatory system would not account for. And that's why we think at least it's better to start. And I sort of take issue, I think, with the Honourable Lady in terms of the timeline on this. We could make both changes relatively easy. The MPPF is currently being consulted on. The Levelling Up Bill is stuck in the other place. But we think it might be better to start with, as a first step, incorporating into national policy and guidance that presumption in favour of swift bricks with a mandatory approach in reserve. I'll happily give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Giving way, and I just wanted to make one comment about his reservation about a mandatory target. I understand where he's coming from, and I think in my own speech I did accept that there will be some places where, because of the nature of nests that Swift like to use, it may not be appropriate. But couldn't we deal with that by way of guidance that would make sure that the impetus was there for this cheap, quick, easy step, but making sure that it wasn't wasted in certain circumstances?
I think that is a reasonable point, and it's certainly something I will take away and look at. I don't honestly think, Sir Edward, in terms of the understandable questions that are being put to me about mandation, that we're too far apart when it comes to what I'm talking about. We're talking about essentially amending national planning policy and guidance to make it a presumption that these are installed on every development, every building, unless a local authority or developer can justify an exemption being made. So, you know, I'd say to honourable members, as I did previously, we are going to go away and consider, this is the first time the House has debated this issue, we're going to go away and carefully consider whether we require to move to a mandatory system in the near future if no rapid progress is made. But I think as a first step, we're certainly convinced that this is something that the government should do. In the time that's left to me, Sir Edward, I'd like to just put a couple of questions to the Minister that I hope she can address in her remarks that she will make shortly. Firstly, as a number of honourable members have alluded to, it would be useful to know whether her department have engaged, in light of this debate, or intend to at least engage, following it, colleagues in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs on this specific issue of whether swift brick installation should be scored in the B&G metric. We can't understand really why it isn't so, and there's a strong case for doing so. Secondly, has her department or the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs produced an estimate on the number of swift bricks required to restore breeding swift numbers across the country? I don't know if other honourable members have found this as an issue in preparing for this debate. I certainly have. There are no reliable estimates. Local conservation groups have made them. People out there in the country have had goes at what they might be. It would be useful, I think, in contemplating that issue of whether we need a mandatory system or just a presumption in favour, to know precisely the metric we're aiming to get to across England. So could the Minister respond to that question? Thirdly, Sir Edward, does the government agree with the opposition that swift brick installation rates are lower than they need to be to address the decline of swift numbers in the UK? And lastly, if the government does agree that current installation rates are too low, but believes that a mandatory approach remains inappropriate, does the government at least accept that existing national planning policy and guidance is, as I've argued, insufficiently prescriptive to increase coverage at the speed required, and will it consider revising it accordingly? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Edward. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I will do my best to address all points raised, but if I miss any, I will follow up in writing following the debate here today. But let me start by congratulating the honourable member for Stockton South for securing this debate, and thank you also to all honourable members here for their valuable contributions this afternoon. As well as, we've received some in-depth aviation know-how from a former aviation minister, incredibly informed views on the planning process from a former planning minister, and also some wonderful anecdotes and poetry about swifts. And I have to say, some of my favourite memories of nature are sitting out in the early morning, seeing them swoop and dive and dance. It's one of the most beautiful things that is so pure about swifts as a species. And I think one of the great things about this debate here today is that we are all united in wanting to improve the population of swifts across the UK. Now, my honourable friend, the member for Stockton South, referred to them as urban boy racers, an anecdote I did quite appreciate, and they do certainly feel the need for speed when you watch them. Now, before I address the points raised, I just want to make very clear that the government does greatly welcome actions by developers that contribute to and enhance the natural and local environment. We recognise the importance of protecting priority species, which is why our national planning policy framework establishes that opportunities to improve biodiversity in and around developments should be integrated as part of their design. And this consideration is especially essential when this could secure measurable net gains for biodiversity. And that's why it is so encouraging to see design features such as swift bricks in new builds to provide nesting facilities for birds included in housing plans. And we do support, in some circumstances, planning conditions or obligations being used to require that planning permission provides for works that will measurably increase biodiversity. Just as we've seen with Brighton and Hove Local Planning Authority, which has taken decisive action by mandating the inclusion of swift bricks on certain types of developments, I'm sure in no small part to the tenacious campaigning of the Honourable Lady from Brighton Pavilion. And I'm sure that many honourable members, and some have been highlighted here today, are aware of similar actions within their constituencies where specific species necessitate such measures. Now, in the case of swifts, action is needed. I think we're all united in thinking that here today. It is of great concern that a staggering 62% of these magnificent birds have disappeared from our skies over the past 26 years. So worrying is their decline that they have been added to the UK Red List of birds of conservation concern, as highlighted by a number of members here today. While external factors like adverse weather and a lack of insect food for chicks are contributing to their decline, the scarcity of suitable nesting spaces only exacerbates the issue. And that is why I wholeheartedly agree that conservation efforts must continue to focus on ensuring safe nesting sites are in sufficient supply. Furthermore, since swifts can be found throughout England, the fact is any urban or rural area with buildings can potentially provide homes for these birds. But it is also worth noting that in order to maximise the chances of successful colonisation by swifts, it is crucial to install the bricks within certain parameters, considering aspects such as openness and height off the ground, as outlined by the Honourable Member for Witney. Now, there is planning practice guidance which does set out the benefits of resting facilities for birds, but I will take on board the points raised by the Honourable Member for Witney and take that back to the Department. I do, however, have a moment of cross-party unity. It's rare that myself and the Shadow Minister stand up and agree on a great deal at the dispatch box sometimes, but we do also believe that we do need to be cautious when it comes to mandating national planning conditions. There could be some circumstances where development proposals, for example, will not impact on bird habitats. So imposing conditions and ensuring those planning permissions are subject to additional and unreasonable requirements to accommodate species that are not present in their area, whilst creating financial burdens to comply with and to discharge the condition. I will give way.
I cannot believe what I'm hearing. We know that this brick costs about 25 quid, right? And that is going to be a tiny amount when it comes to the new developments that could have them. The worst case scenario, if you put one up and it doesn't get used, is nothing. There's no problem. You could probably have other birds that will use it. So can I please impress upon the Minister that warm words don't get us anywhere. I'm hearing too many warm words and not enough action. This is a simple thing she could do, and I cannot believe that she's refusing to do it.
Well, there are some points further on in my contributions that I hope will address some of what she raised there. I will give way.
To the Honourable Lady, and I'm pleased to hear her enthusiasm. I think the point is this, that when the last revision of the NPPF came in and introduced this desire, this guidance towards biodiversity net gain, and indicated things like swift bricks and hedgehog highways or what have you, there was a hope that developers would take it up. They've now had several years and had a chance, and they haven't. And in many developments, the box is ticked by putting up some wooden boxes here and there, which will deteriorate over 3 or 4 years and then be gone. The point about the swift brick is it is permanent. It cannot go. It does not weather and deteriorate. I mean, my wooden boxes at my house are already looking a bit ropey after, well, as I say, after the predations of the parakeets, after whatever they've been up for now, 7 or 8 years, and will need to be replaced. A brick would not. And that, I think, is the reason why we're all so keen to see them mandated.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful to my right honourable friend. He has incredible wisdom on this field, having served in the role and focusing on planning in his time in government. He will know that we have recently consulted on the new National Planning Policy Framework, and I will come to that a little bit further in my contributions, which I hope will address some of his concerns. Now, I think it's fair to say that more research is needed in the area of how best we monitor swift populations and improve swift populations, as I think was outlined by the Shadow Minister. And I have received assurances from DEFRA and its agencies that they will monitor swift populations and assess any positive effects. And I would like to pass on my thanks to organisations like Swift Conservation and local groups like Hampshire Swifts and St Wolferton Swifts. I have to, because your sister is in the Honourable Lady's sister is in the audience, so it would not be right not to pay tribute to them for their work on this field. Sir Edward, whilst we don't at present intend to make swift bricks compulsory in new housing, I do want to assure the House and the Chamber here today that measures are being introduced across government to protect and enhance our natural and local environment, which I will outline now. Honourable members may be surprised to learn that other familiar birds like sparrows and starlings, which were added to the UK Red List 21 years ago, have remained on that list since. And so to tackle this, we're placing greater emphasis on implementing a range of policies that intersect with planning to achieve better outcomes for both habitats and species in England. We've already made great progress. Just last month, the government announced funding of £40 million to support 48 authorities in England responsible for developing local nature recovery strategies. These identify and outline ways to enhance or recover the existing or potential species in the respective areas, and their importance really cannot be overstated. So, I will.
I'm waiting for the microphone to come on. I'm not sure it's going to. Does she not accept, though, with nature recovery strategies, that they are aimed at birds that would nest in trees and hedgerows and so on, and that it's not really relevant to the swift debate because we're talking about houses with bricks in?
It's a reasonable point made by the Honourable Lady, but this is just to outline some of the wider work that's being done, not just to help the swift community, but the wider bird populations across the UK as well. I will.
Laying out the points that she's doing. Government is doing a lot, but the point that we're seeking to make is that it isn't doing anything to help swifts. And that's why I made the comments that I did at some length to explain why they're different, because they won't be impacted by the measures that are being taken very laudably in other areas. It's the swift brick that is needed because it's niche for swifts.
Well, appreciated, and again, thank him for some of his valuable contribution today, but specifically the point around ensuring that swift bricks are installed at the right height, because we know that that is vital for ensuring that they are fit for purpose. I will.
She's touched on the right point, but that can be dealt with by guidance, can't it? So if you have a mandate to require swift bricks wherever possible, you can then lay out the guidance after that as to how you're going to go out and do it.
Appreciated again. As I've said, I will take that back to the department following our debate today. Now, in addition to the strategy I've already outlined, there are a range of cross-government measures to support the needs of nature wider in local planning, including mandatory biodiversity net gain that sees most types of new development required to deliver improvements of 10% or more for biodiversity. Work is ongoing with DEFRA at the moment to finalise the regulations, but we are confident that this update into the planning process will have positive outcomes for biodiversity. The Honourable Member for Bristol East asked questions specifically on this point. As she outlined, DEFRA have committed to keeping species features like swift bricks, bat and bird boxes under review, and they are also committed to updating the biodiversity metric every 3 to 5 years, which provides further opportunities for change and also for new innovations to be considered there too. Another measure in place to support the needs of nature in local planning is the Green Infrastructure Framework published in January 2023. Now, that framework helps local planning authorities and developers meet the National Planning Policy Framework requirements to consider green infrastructure in local plans and new developments. The framework's Green Infrastructure Planning and Design Code is a helpful resource which already advocates for using British Standard 42021, which calls for integral nest boxes to be installed in new developments. Furthermore, the requirement to consider green infrastructure in local plans is embedded in the National Model Design Code, which provides guidance for local planning authorities on setting clear design standards through design codes and already refers to the Green Infrastructure Framework, reinforcing the importance of the measures that it outlines. Now, as we consider the implementing of a national policy, we do need to reflect on its practicalities and whether planning is the most appropriate mechanism to achieve the desired outcomes. I don't think there's any denying in this room that the current planning process can be confusing and outdated for users. And that's why through our Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, it's so crucial so that we can deliver changes to the planning policy to address this complexity, including modernising it, increasing flexibility and regulating pre-application engagement with communities. The changes that we want to make to the planning system will see a more consistent, streamlined and digitally enabled approach to the way planning applications are made. These will be proportionate to the scale and nature of the development proposed to ensure faster and better decision making. And I must make clear that the government recognises the fact that many local planning authorities, as well as the wider planning sector, are facing capacity and capability challenges. And that's why we've developed a programme of support working with partners across the planning sector to ensure that local planning authorities have the skills and capacity they need both now and in the future. To this end, it is another concern we have about the introduction of mandatory conditions that may impose an additional burden on all local planning authorities in terms of enforcing breaches of condition. And as legislators, we all do need to be mindful of potential unintended consequences of introducing national policy.
She will know, as I do, and my honourable neighbour from North West Hants shares a local authority with me. Test Valley Borough Council already requires a whole long list of specifications when a planning application is granted and then completed, including, what type of brick, what type of roofing material, what the windows are going to look like. Mandating a standard brick per dwelling doesn't seem very complicated to me.
Well, I've heard the Honourable Lady loud and clear, but I hope she'll recognise my wider point of not wanting to add unnecessary additional complexity on a service that already faces much of it. Now, consultations such as the one on the National Planning Policy Framework in December 2022 are invaluable sources of information. This was referenced by the Honourable Member for North Shropshire. We are currently analysing the responses to that consultation, which included answers as to how national policy could be strengthened for small-scale nature interventions, like, for example, Swift bricks, and a government response will be provided in due course. We also use the consultation as an opportunity to outline our commitment to a wider national planning policy review. That review will align with the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill receiving royal assent and will ensure that the planning system capitalises on all opportunities to support the environment, address climate change and, of course, level up the economy. In this review, we have already committed to exploring incorporating nature into development through better planning for green infrastructure and nature-friendly buildings. I'm sure that honourable members will appreciate we cannot preempt the findings of that review, and so we wouldn't want to introduce a kind of national compulsory planning policy at this stage until that review has been concluded, but we do remain conscious of the plight of our Swift population and the potential benefits that mandatory Swift bricks could have. Now, before I close, I do want to reiterate once again that the government is committed to protecting and enhancing our natural and local environments. Through our planning changes and cross-government working, we're pursuing a fair and balanced approach to achieve better outcomes for biodiversity. Our policy interventions further will empower local areas to adopt a targeted approach in reversing the decline of swift birds, I should add, based on local opportunities. Local planning authorities have the power to adopt policies locally which protect species, and it's important this is done in a holistic way. And I will give way.
I just wanted to ask if she could be clear. Could you just confirm to us that she's not saying no? It's just slightly complicated. She's not saying no. I understand she's a minister in a department and there's collective decision making that has to be gone through. I understand all that, but she'll go away and have a look and think about it. And in doing so, would she consider two things? First of all, have a look at the wooden boxes that developers put up, may have put up 3 or 4 years ago, and perhaps get a sense of whether they're all still there and consider the permanence of this thing. But secondly, consider that I understand that she's given notice that she won't be standing at the next election, that in a small way she may be able to leave her mark for the future. And I think if she said yes, we'd all be happy to call it the Davidson brick into the future, and she'll be able to gaze at the Swifts, as she said at the start of her speech, with some joy in the future and see the part she played in their success.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful to my right honourable friend, and just to confirm, this isn't something that's being considered by government at the moment, but as I said, in the review of the National Planning Policy Framework, there are opportunities to feed in, and I would, of course, encourage all members here, all interested campaigners, to feed into that consultation. I will give way.
The problem is, though, isn't it, that that review is absolutely massive. It covers a huge range of things. And the reason that we're having this specific debate here today is to try to flag up something that needs a sort of very specific response. How can she assure us that when it comes to that consultation, this just doesn't get lost amongst everything else?
Well, I think by the tenacity of the members here today and the incredible campaigning of groups such as those sitting in the audience watching this debate today, I do remain confident that this will very much remain on the radar, not just of my department, but more widely across governments.
Can I add my voice to the ones that we've just heard? This is a way in which she can make her real mark on nature. It could be something that forever she'll be able to say is something that she did that would help for the future. I personally feel that, if I hope the department forgive me, I think this is quite a niche subject. I think one they perhaps don't understand in the way that they ought to, in terms of how they could help. Would she agree to meet a cross-party group of people who care about this, will come and see her, will plead the case again, and then maybe she'll be able to say that she will think again?
Well, it's almost like the honourable member preempted my final sentence, where I was indeed going to make the offer to meet to discuss this further with interested members from across the House, but also interested campaigners from across the country, because I recognise this is an issue that's really provoked hearts and minds, and it's important that we get this right to stop the decline of swift populations. So in my final closing remarks, Sir Edward, I just want to assure honourable members that we do want to build a future where swifts can thrive and soar high in our skies, bringing joy to all, like myself, who witness their graceful flight, and I'm very grateful to all honourable members for taking such a close interest today.
Matt Vickers, to sum up.
Thank you. Thanks to the Minister for her comments. I'm sure she's heard the call, and I hope that she'll reflect the arguments and passion to the government. It's been great to see such passion for swifts, and in fact, honourable members putting their words into action, installing so many bricks in their own homes. All too often as MPs we debate many measures about protecting our natural environment, and they usually come down to debates around costs and consequences. These tiny bricks comes with tiny consequences, tiny costs, but can have a huge impact on our treasured species. It seems like a no-brainer, but I'm confident, given the passion of Hannah, the campaigners, and in fact so many MPs, I'm sure this campaign doesn't end here. This debate has raised awareness, driven huge press coverage, and like many others, I've lost count of how many people have had to explain what a swift brick is to. Congratulations to everybody involved. Congratulations to Hannah on a fantastic petition campaign. Keep going. I'm in touch with my local council about what we can do in our area with these fantastic bricks, and I'm sure as a result of today's debate, many, many others will be too. Thank you.
The question is this House has considered Petition 626737 relating to the use of swift bricks in new housing. As many of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.